Yesterday was the first Monday in October, and that means, of course, the Supreme Court is back in session. Now, last session, we had the monumental Dobbs decision that finally overturned, after nearly 5 decades, the Roe versus Wade decision. But I hear many experts tell me that this next session could even be more monumental. A case was argued just today in the Supreme Court that could have huge ramifications. Joining us now to discuss it is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Hans Von Spakovsky. Hans, by the way, also one of the leading election law experts and a veteran of the Justice Department. Hans, thank you so much for joining us. So tell me about this case today. This involves redistricting?
Yeah, it's Merrill versus Milligan. It's out of Alabama. Alabama has had 7 congressional districts now for several decades. And in the 1990s, a federal court said, well, of those 7, one of them has to be a majority-minority district. That's a district in which black residents of the state are a majority and therefore can elect their candidate of choice. So Alabama has followed that for the past 3 decades. The latest plan maintained that 7 congressional districts, one of which is majority-minority, and they didn't make that many changes from what the federal judge originally drew up 3 decades ago. However, they were sued by all of these progressive groups saying, oh, no, you need to create 2 majority-minority districts. And Alabama said, well, no, if we do that, we'll be violating the Equal Protection Clause, because the Supreme Court has said race can't be the predominant factor in how you draw up lines. And so that's really the issue before the Supreme Court.
All right, and now let's unpack this a little bit, because this first decision by a federal judge, that sounds like a judge stepping in and basically demanding gerrymandering along racial lines.
Well, I agree. I think that is what the lower court do, but it's even worse because he didn't really find any evidence that the state has been racially discriminating, and that's, of course, what the Voting Rights Act is supposed to stop. The lower court seemed to have based their decision on proportionality. In other words, because of the size of the black population in the state, the lower court apparently believed they're entitled to 2 congressional seats. But the Voting Rights Act specifically says it does not guarantee proportional representation. All it guarantees is equality of opportunity, not equality of results. So again, I think the lower court actually violated the Voting Rights Act when they did that.
This is fascinating. For instance, I live in the state of Maryland, and we have 8 congressional districts. For the last 10 years now, I think, 7 of them have been represented by Democrats, 1 by Republicans. And listen, Maryland's a pretty blue state. There's a lot of, it votes traditionally for a Democrat for president, but not by an 8-to-1 margin. I think in the last election, Biden versus Trump, I think that Trump ended up getting somewhere over 35, closer to 38% of the vote. But we Republicans aren't represented. Can I make the same argument that a judge should step in and redraw lines based on that proportionality?
Well, in fact, Democrats and the progressive left have been pushing that very idea in various states where they are in the minority. They've been trying to get courts to recognize proportionality as a reason for them being entitled to getting more seats. Most courts that have looked at this have said, well, no, that's not something you can get under the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. And so now they've been trying to do it under the state constitution. What this case is about is them trying to basically twist the Voting Rights Act to require proportional representation, despite the fact that the statute doesn't allow for that. And I think that's what's really going on in this state, because, as I said, the state legislature really used race-neutral principles when they were drawing these districts. It's the plaintiffs that used race as the main factor in trying to draw up a new plan. So they are the ones who actually, I think, are violating the equal protection or one person, one vote standard of the Constitution.
Yeah. and forgive me, you know, the extent of my constitutional education was a really great civics teacher at my senior year in high school, and Schoolhouse Rock, which was incredibly influential. But I'm pretty sure that the responsibility for drawing these congressional districts is not in the judicial system, and it's not even in Congress. Isn't this each state's legislature that's supposed to come up with these districts? So how does the court have a say in this in the first place?
Well, look, that's true. Legislatures do have the primary responsibility, but they do have to do it in accord with, for example, the Voting Rights Act, which obviously says you can't discriminate on a racial basis. And that's what the lower court used as its basis for saying that these districts have to be redrawn. They're claiming that the legislature violated the Voting Rights Act, specifically Section 2. Like I said, I think that's incorrect. I don't think there was any evidence of discrimination. And I think the Supreme Court, hopefully, will overturn this and rule for the state of Alabama.
Well, and Hans, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm through the looking glass, because you're telling me that the Voting Rights Act says, rightfully, that you can't draw districts based on racial discrimination. And a judge then ordered the state to literally draw congressional districts utilizing race as the criteria. So again, this seems a little contradictory from the get-go.
No, I think it is. But like I said, it is tied to the proportionality argument that the left has now been pushing for quite a while. Like I said, so far, they really haven't been successful in this, but they keep filing lawsuits pushing it. And in this case, they managed to get a lower court to agree with it.
So this is the first time the court, post Amy Coney Barrett, post Donald Trump's 3 Supreme Court nominees, will see something like this. Based on this current makeup, what do you expect to happen here?
Well, given the outlook of conservatives, I mean, they believe in enforcing the Voting Rights Act, but they don't believe in racial discrimination being a positive factor or something that you can base these kind of decisions on. So I think hopefully what they'll do is rule in favor of the state. Keep in mind, this is only one of 2 really important cases. They have another case they're going to be hearing out of North Carolina in which you had the same thing happen. There you had the state Supreme Court step in and say that the legislature had engaged in political gerrymandering when it drew the district, supposedly in violation of the state constitution, even though there's absolutely nothing in the state constitution about that. So that's going to be a second case along these lines.
All right. So now, what will the domino effect be here if the court finds that that these districts are improper in Alabama, and they can go ahead and draw them up based on regular criteria rather than across racial lines? Does this affect pretty much every state in the union?
Well, yeah. What it will hopefully do is finally stamp out this push by the left. Just like I said, twist the Voting Rights Act in a way it was never intended. I've seen these hysterical claims by folks on the left that if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Alabama, it will destroy the Voting Rights Act. No, it'll simply enforce the Voting Rights Act the way it was intended by Congress.
Well, a big day in the Supreme Court here. And by the way, we only have a minute left here, Hans, but I know a federal judge just found that Georgia's election integrity laws that they passed back in 2021 that President Biden said was Jim Crow on steroids, Jim Crow 2.0, said it was fine. Is that the end of that argument now? Is the Justice Department still investigating that, Hans?
No, this was the Stacey Abrams lawsuit that she filed. It's been going on for 4 years. The Justice Department lawsuit, unfortunately, is still going on. Wow. But look, this should be the nail in the coffin for Stacey Abrams' claims that she actually won the 2018 election, because the court, and by the way, an Obama appointee threw out all of her claims, saying the law is not discriminatory.
She's running for re-election right now, so we'll see how that shakes down. Hans Von Spakovsky does the Heritage Foundation proud. Thanks for being here, Hans.
Thanks for having me.
More to come on O'Connor Tonight.